Thank you. Okay, got it. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this workshop on how to help young children to self-regulate. My name is Simone Martens. I think you can go to the next slide. And I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm also a registered play therapist, and I work with children ages 3 to 10 and also with adults. That includes lots of parents and teachers. And I do have a special place in my heart for teachers because I used to be a teacher back when I lived in Brazil. And I did that for a few years before I moved to the US and started pursuing the counseling career. So part of my job at JFS has been also fulfilling a partnership that we had with the Dallas ISD schools. And I had the opportunity to provide play therapy services at one of the elementary schools at the ISD. And that was during the pandemic, which, it's still here. So I did it for 2020 and 2021. And I remember at the time, we actually ended up extending our services to the teachers because they were under so much stress. And I do have a lot of compassion for teachers. So I was trying to equip them and support them as well during these difficult times where, all of us are a little bit dysregulated. So you can go to the next slide. Let's see. So this presentation was prepared today just for psychoeducational purposes, but if you would like to learn more about our services, or as you were watching this, if you realize that, maybe you or a loved one is struggling and needs some support, please go to our website and take a look at our services that are available. Also, feel free to contact our intake department. I'm leaving the contact here so that we can see how we can best support you. So for tonight, I would like to learn a little bit more of who is in the audience. So put it in the chat for me, like, are you a teacher, a parent, both, or maybe you're a clinician? And what are the ages of the kids that you interact with? So let me know, put it in the chat, whether you're a teacher, parent, both, what grades you teach, or what are the ages of the children you interact with. Okay. So let's see. Teacher 1 to 3. Teacher 3s. That's a fun age. Okay, infants, 3rd grade. Pre-K. More preschool age. I love that age. They're so fun. Okay, this a little bit older student. Yeah, and those are definitely some of the ages that I have worked with. So thank you for sharing. And that gives me a little bit of an idea on how to tailor some of the things that I will be sharing. And you can go to the next slide. The next question I have for you, like, what are the top 2 behaviors that you find the most difficult to deal with the kids that you interact? Okay. A little bit more pre-K. 3rd and 4th. That changes the game. That age changes the game. So let me know in the chat, top 2 behaviors that you find the most challenging and difficult to deal with in your work. Ooh, yeah, not following directions and screaming. What else? Lack of impulse control in third graders and defiance. Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Disrespectful. Absolutely. And that can be a big trigger also for teachers and parents when they feel disrespected. That can set us off. Unable to sit still. That's so hard. Especially for the very young ones, it is hard. And I'm gonna give some tips today about that. Okay, thank you for sharing, and feel free to share more if you can think of anything else. We can go to the next slide. Yes. So my hope today is just to move us forward a little bit on our learning journey. So be patient with yourself, because all of us will come in different places, right? So some of us, are like seasoned veteran teachers or parents that, you've kind of have a lot of tools already and you've been able to implement it. And so if that's you, some of the things that I will be sharing might sound a little basic, but I'm actually glad that you joined, because you get to have a little review and you get to hold the hands of those who come after you and support them in their learning journey. Now, there might be some of you that you have the tools, you kind of know what to do, but sometimes it's just difficult to apply, either because you yourself are feeling overwhelmed, or lack of support, or maybe you get triggered and everything that kind of goes out of the window. And so if that's you, we're also going to have some things to practice in this workshop. And also, there might be someone who is joining that is a beginning teacher or a new parent, and they're really just wanting like anything to work with. So you're going to get something as well. But I also want to remind all of you, like, just to be patient with yourself, because some days, like, nothing is going to work. No matter what you try, nothing is going to work. You're just gonna have to extend yourself some grace and try your best, but also know that you are in your learning journey and you are doing the best you can each day. So we can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, so this is a topic that I want to make sure that I cover, because it's going to be really important for us to have some understanding of the brain before we can help a child self-regulate. So put it in the chat for me. Who in here is familiar with window of tolerance? Just say yes or no. Have you ever heard the term window of tolerance? Let's see. No. Okay, no. Yeah, great. That's good for me to assess, because I want to gauge how much time I'm going to spend explaining this. So pretty much, window of tolerance is a term that was coined by psychiatrist Dan Siegel, and he has written many books. I'm going to link them at the end. But it talks about our brain's capacity to tolerate emotions. So all of us have a window. Imagine a window in our brain, which is our capacity to tolerate emotions and stress. So that window develops in children. Like when children are born, they have zero tolerance, but then as they develop, that supposedly grows with them. So when they're little, they have very little tolerance, and as they are growing, given that the right conditions are provided, their window of tolerance expands. Now, it also varies during the day. So if you think about, even for us adults, there are some times of the day that we can tolerate more stress, and sometimes that our capacity is much shorter. So If you think about like when we are hungry, like as for me, for example, like if I'm hungry, like all my niceness is gone. Like I'm just not nice anymore. Or if I'm tired, if I didn't get a good night of sleep, my capacity to tolerate emotions is going to be much shorter. Other things that might be happening physiologically, just like I mentioned, hungry, tired, or emotion, like feeling lonely, feeling disconnected. That is also very stressful, and it shortens our capacity to tolerate emotions. Even if you are not feeling safe. So when we don't feel safe, when we have either like a perceived threat or a real threat in the environment, that also throws us into fight or flight or freeze, which I'm going to cover in a little bit. And so another thing that influences our capacity to tolerate emotions is something called attachment style. And I'm not going to be able to spend too much time covering attachment. Some of you may be already familiar with it. If you're not, feel free to go Google attachment theory. But pretty much, can you go back one? So when a child is born, like a baby, to the extent that their primary caregivers can meet their physical and emotional needs consistently, they form what we call a secure attachment. So when a child feels secure, they feel more free to explore, to play. They feel okay about themselves. They feel safe. That's pretty much what it means. And feeling safe helps to expand your ability to tolerate emotions as you grow. Now, for children who have had caregivers who were scary, or that they were scared, or that they were inconsistent, or even unavailable, they will develop different attachment styles that will impact their ability to tolerate emotions. Also, children who have undergone trauma and have had any sort of trauma or experienced their parents having trauma, that also is going to impact that. And finally, we need to remember that we're still living in the context of a lingering pandemic that keeps coming back. So when people have this perceived threat of getting sick or dying or having a loved one die, those things are also going to throw them into fight or flight, and it's going to shorten their capacity to tolerate emotions. So keep all of that in the back of your mind as we understand what are the conditions that our brain is in, and what are the different things that we can do to help us regulate and be within that window. Now we can go to the next slide. So what does that look like in our brain? So imagine within that window is our comfort zone. When we have the right amount of stress, let's say like a positive stress, like we're all well fed, we had a good night of sleep, we're feeling safe, we're feeling connected. This is the optimal state for learning. So this is where we want kids to be in school, especially in school, right? So this is when we're grounded, we're open, we're present, and we're calm. So that's the optimal state. It's the comfort zone. Now, when we have more stress than we can handle that goes outside of our window of tolerance, and we can go to the next slide. Now we're in a state what we call hyperarousal, which means we entered like a fight or flight response. And so that's when you see a lot of those externalizing behaviors. You see, kids are anxious, overwhelmed, or you see like the kicking, the screaming, the punching, the hitting, all of the aggressive or angry behaviors. It will show when we are outside of that window in hyperarousal. Now, the opposite of that, which is another survival response that we have in our brain, and we can go to the next slide, it's going to be the hypoarousal. Jamie, can you hit the next slide? Jamie? Oh, there you go. Thanks. Sometimes there's a little bit of delay on my side. Um, so when they are below that window and that hypoaroused, they're in the freeze response. And that response leaves the child in that shutdown, withdrawn mode. You know, they're disconnected. They are kind of an autopilot. They're not going to remember anything that was taught that day. There's some memory loss. They're pretty much not present. And so those states in our brain, either hyperarousal or hypoarousal, like too much stress or too little stress, or being stressed to the point where you disengage. So that's when we're operating like outside of our window of tolerance. And that's when we need to have some activities that will help us regulate and go back to that optimal state. So with that said, we can go to the next slide, please. Yes. So this is what it looks like. Window of tolerance, here's the comfort zone. Above it, hyperarousal. Below it is hypoarousal. So depending on the state that the child is, we're going to approach them in a different way. And so if you think about even for us as adults and what is helpful to us when we're like in this stressed moment or when we are disengaged, it will also look different for the children that we work with. And so for you as a teacher or as a parent, and I'm using these terms interchangeably because a lot of the teachers are also parents, you know your child best. So not everything is going to work out for every child, and you're going to sometimes have to try different things until you find out. So we can go to the next. Okay, and so this is how we're going to approach, and we're going to use the model, what's called the 3 R's, that was developed by Bruce Perry, a psychiatrist. He also found the Child Trauma Academy, and there's a lot more resources on his website. He wrote several books. I really like his work. And I like this model because it's simple, it's easy to remember, and also helps us to understand the regulating process. A lot of times adults, when they see children dysregulated, they go into straight to reasoning, right? They go straight to like, why are you doing this? Like, you should know better. Like, be nice. Can't you just be nice? And they start having like all of these questions and trying to reason with the child. And that's not going to work because we have to start from the bottom. We have to help them regulate from the bottom up. And so when we go straight into reason, it's just like, it's flying over their head. It's really not, sometimes it even escalates the behavior. When we go into reasoning and they're in hyperarousal, now we're getting into a power struggle. And when they're in hypoarousal, they withdraw and shut down even more. They're like, I'm not talking to you. Like I'm gone. They're disconnected. So we can go to the next slide and see how that process starts. Okay, so the first stage is the regulating stage. And I love this quote by Gary Landreth, which is one of the founders of play therapy. He talks about be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Now, who is familiar with this quote? Has anyone ever heard this before? Just put yes or no in the chat. Okay, some people have, others haven't. Okay, great. Okay, so think about a thermostat. What does a thermostat do? It's always in the same temperature, right? It's always in that comfortable temperature that we find for that day. And so this is what the adult represents for the child. And so the child, on the other hand, because they're still developing their window of tolerance, their temperature changes. Like it rises and falls and rises and falls, right? And so the thermostat is very sensitive to the temperature change, and it helps to bring it back to that comfort zone. It's always that calm, composed adult. I know that's not easy, but that's what is the most helpful to helping a child regulate in the first place, is to regulate yourself. Because if the child escalates that temperature and you escalate with them, then everything goes out of the window. Like, you can't help them. So first, you act as a co-regulator for that child that is going up and down, up and down. And let's see how we do that, because I think that's one of the hardest parts. It's for us not to get triggered when we are seeing a child misbehave. We get triggered with them, and then we are not in the good place to help them. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, and this comes straight from Conscious Discipline from Becky Bailey, and she teaches us how to be a star. Now, I know that a lot of the Jewish schools are familiar with Conscious Discipline. Maybe this is more implemented in the elementary age, but I will say that Conscious Discipline can be used to all ages. And I will talk a little bit more about that in the end. And so the acronym that she uses is the STAR acronym, which stands for stop, take a deep breath, and relax. So when you think about the window of tolerance, when we are in the optimal state of relational, let's say in the optimal state of being able to relate emotionally, we're breathing and we're sending oxygen to the brain because we're calm, so we're breathing normally. When we are sent into fight or flight, then if we're in hyperarousal, we start shallow breathing. We start like, right? We enter that, we get really nervous. And now what we're doing by getting nervous is cutting off the oxygen supply to the brain. And then we can't think straight anymore. And so when I start teaching the breathing to people, to adults especially, they're like, oh my gosh, is that really, like, you're going to teach me how to breathe? And they think it's not worth it. But I'm going to say, without it, without that stopping, like, you're going to slow down the moment. You're going to regulate yourself, bring it back to that window of tolerance, yourself first. And by doing that, you're going to start like relaxing the shoulders, relaxing the jaw muscles. And that will help you lower your stress levels and be able to calm and be that thermostat for the child. And you're going to have to do it a few times. Not only one time is not going to be enough. You're going to have to do it. And what Becky Bailey teaches, and I practice this daily when I'm under stress, I say to myself, keep breathing. I'm safe. I can handle this. So let's practice together. And we're not going to be able to unmute ourselves, but as you, on the count of 3, as you take a deep breath, start saying these things, because it's going to turn off that inner chatter in your brain that starts when the child escalates. You know, that inner chatter that goes on saying, oh, there we go. He's doing it again. It's just to make me mad. I don't make enough money for this. Like, how many days for the summer? Like, we start just going into this inner chatter that is not helpful. And so instead of saying that, we're going to turn that off. We're going to turn off also the fight or flight response by sending oxygen to the brain and saying these things to ourselves. Okay. So let's practice on the count of 3. So 1, 2, 3. Keep breathing. I'm safe. I can handle this. One more time. Keep breathing. I'm safe. I can handle this. Now, how does that feel? Is that helpful? Can you put it in the chat? I wonder how that felt for you. Okay. Yeah, so some people are saying like more relaxed. We're going to stop, Slow down the movement. And you can do this in other situations in your life. Like it doesn't need to be at work. It doesn't need to be like, it can be at home. It can be any time that you're stressed. And that is helpful. And so the next slide, let's see what comes after that. Okay, now it comes to the regulating behaviors. So think about you were able to be that thermostat to actively calm yourself. Now we can offer some potential activities to the children to help them calm down. And I am aware that some of this is going to be hard to implement at times. So some of it will be fit for the school. Some of that will have to be done at home. And some of that can be implemented in increments, like throughout the school day. And so in that way, we're not waiting for the behavior to happen, but we're bringing them to that regulated moment like throughout the day. So first is to ask yourself, like, either are they in hyper arousal or hypo arousal? Like, are we needing to help them like up regulate or down regulate? And so Becky Bailey brings this to conscious discipline. She talks about taking a break in the safe place. I've seen some schools call it like a calm down corner. I've also seen like call different things. So that is really helpful to have a space like that in the room and where the child can practice some breathing. And Becky Bailey has also that in the conscious discipline website, like just different types of breathing for children. So there's like the balloon and the pretzel and the waterfall. So you can get some examples of that and you practice that breathing with your children before sending them to the safe place where they can practice it on their own. Now, we also need to think about engaging their other senses. So sometimes what adults do with children who are dysregulated, they, in going straight to that reasoning, what happens is we're only considering the thinking part of the brain. And we have to remember that our brain is very complex. It has other parts. So it's important to engage those other parts of the brain that help with regulation. So maybe engaging their motor skills, engaging their auditory, their touch, their all of the sensory, like the taste and the smell. And so those things also help kids to regulate as opposed to just talking. We think we can talk them down into regulating, but actually sometimes they need those other activities. So listening to classical or calming music, if we want them to down regulate, they're too hyper. Sometimes we want them to up regulate, and then like doing some walking, some running, dancing, jumping jacks. And even the kids who are in hyper arousal, sometimes instead of trying to contain that, doing some of the motor helps to eliminate some of that stress, like, to work it out and then be able to, okay, now I can calm down. So it really depends on the child, and it really takes some time to figure out what works for each one or for the group that you work with. So you're gonna have to test different things. Drinking cold water, that helps, because when we are in fight or flight, our body temperature rises and we start feeling like really hot. So that also engages the taste sense and helps them down regulate. Like sometimes, and this is kind of controversial, like people kind of feel a little bit hesitant to do this, but there's like sugar-free, like lemon drops or mint, also helps to engage the taste in those senses. Do not give them candy. It's not like, oh, you're screaming, I'm going to give you something to, it's not that. What I'm saying is I actually had a situation with a child where the family came for counseling and the child didn't want to get out of the car. Like he didn't want to come in. He was 10 and he was playing video games. It was time to come to counseling. He didn't want to come in. So he was in fight or flight. Like he entered into a power struggle with mom. So mom called me. I was in my office. I could see them in the parking lot. And I'm like, why are they not getting out of the car? And so she called me and said, he doesn't want to go in. And so now I am getting fight or flight. I'm like, okay. And sometimes I go into freeze too. I'm like deer in the headlights. Like, okay, what do I do? And so guess what I did? I went through that process. I started breathing. Okay, I'm safe. I can handle this. I got this. And I got some couple of bottle of cold water because it was the summertime and it was 100 degrees outside. And this boy is in the car, like sweating, refusing to leave the car. And so now I come out, I'm in the parking lot, and I just, sit with him in silence for a little bit. And then I start doing some of the reflecting skills that I'm going to teach later today. And then I give him some water. And then we start talking as he starts calming down. I get a mint and then I offer him some mint and he engages in that. And then he agrees to come in. We spend some more time in the lobby. And then I told him, when you're ready, we can go in. And at some point he said, I'm ready. But that took like 25 minutes, which felt like forever for me. And then, so that was part of our session. It was just like trying to help him come into the room on his own. And I had to use a lot of the skills put together. So playing with fidgets, having some in the room, like sometimes those stress balls like are really helpful. Even if they are in that explosive mode or that fight or flight, you could do like have something for them that is appropriate to destroy. Like, I don't know how that could work in the classroom, but in the playroom, I have construction paper, I have egg cartoons, I have sometimes like styrofoam cups that I can redirect, that this is not for breaking, but you can choose to break that, and they can do that and meet that need in something that is acceptable to me. And also remembering that what Gary Lander says, that, all feelings are welcome, but not all behaviors are acceptable. So we're helping them regulate, but it's not that they can do, whatever. So another thing that was actually recommended in the book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is a book that I highly recommend for people, especially for people who work with children with trauma. And he recommends martial arts. And we may not be doing that in the school, but that may be something to recommend potentially to parents that have kids that are a lot in hyperarousal. Like martial arts helps with self-regulation because you are anticipating the movements. You have to learn to control your body. It's really helpful. We can go to the next slide. Again, keeping in mind, are they in hypoarousal, hyperarousal? Do we want them to upregulate, downregulate? And different things will work for different kids. So drawing how they feel can be helpful. Maybe some soft pillow or blanket, like if they need that soothing time. Singing is helpful for some kids. Stretching, like having those brain breaks in class. So being able to get up every so often and do some stretching so they send some, oxygen to the brain, wake them up. Listening to upbeat music, like if you're for trying to get them to engage more, that helps. Expressive arts like paint, clay, like building crafts, something that engages them in those motor skills, that's helpful. Playing with sand and water or both. I don't know how that would work in the school, but I have those in the playroom, and most kids love it. It depends on whether they have sensory issues, but most kids will just like play with the sand and grab the sand and watch it fall and feel it in their feet. And for some reason, that's really soothing to them. Unstructured play time. Oh, this is so important. I feel sad when kids get recess taken away because that is a time that helps them regulate. So that's just that unstructured, like running outside, playing, figuring things out, being creative. That is helpful. For some kids, the music might be too much. Like they may need like the noise canceling headphones. Like if there's some kids that just for for those kids, the stimuli coming from noise might be too much. So they may need actually to silence the noise. And finally, being a calm and safe presence by just sitting with them. I know that sometimes that's not possible in class when you have 20 other kids to attend. It's really a challenge when you don't have like an assistant teacher. But sometimes it's all we can do, like just sitting and being able to ride that wave with them. Or if it's a child that is in hypoarousal, like to be that safe and calming presence. And so they feel connected and supported. Okay. The next stage of going up that regulation with the 3 R's is the relate stage. So Bruce Perry and Tina Bryson Payne, which I'm going to cite at the end, talk about being emotionally responsive to the child. And the way that we do that is by offering empathy. You know, just having an adult being able to understand how you feel and reflect that back to you is really helpful to regulate, because a lot of adults think that if they reflect to the child how they're feeling, like if they say something like, you're feeling angry, they think that the child will get even angrier. But the truth is, when we have our feelings acknowledged and recognized, that actually helps us to regulate. It says, oh, like somebody gets me. Like think about yourself if you get home like stressed from work and then you are sharing with your spouse and they just say something like, wow, you had a really hard day. Like that, you felt so frustrated when that happened. And you're like, yes. And then, you know, immediately like your body starts like, oh, like somebody gets me. And now imagine if your spouse says something like, well, you should calm down because, you know, you should know that you actually had a part in this and blah, 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 blah. Like start like criticizing you and, or trying to reason with you, then you get even more upset or you disengage. You're like, you know what, forget it. Like, you don't get it. Like, it doesn't even matter. So let's learn how to do that. Next slide. So before we can reflect a feeling, we have to be really mindful of our voice tone and our body language, because unfortunately, like more than, I think it's like 90% of our communication is sent through body language. And I think it's like 10% from what we're actually saying. So when you are trying to help someone regulate, especially a child, and you are like towering over them or you're not matching their emotion or their affect, that actually can feel threatening and it can send them into even more distress. So in this example of like what not to do or what to do, you see like this other image where the adult lowers down the eye level of the child, and then we can't really see from their voice, but just imagine that their voice tone is going to be very soothing. It's going to match the child's affect. And even in this picture, like the adult is reaching and try to touch their shoulder. Now that is kind of controversial. If it's a child with trauma, or depending on what state they are in fight or flight, they may feel threatened, like if you reach out and try to touch them. So be mindful of that, like use your judgment. Some kids need that physical touch, but some of them it's best to just stand by. Okay, we can go to the next. Now we're going to learn how to do the reflecting feelings, and we're going to do it like very short, very short. This is how Becky Bailey teaches in Conscious Discipline. She teaches that you say, you seem blank, and then reflect the feeling that you think the child is experiencing at the time. You can only guess, you don't know. And why are you saying like you seem? Because you may be wrong. And if you're wrong, they will correct you. Sometimes I reflect a child's feeling like, you're feeling sad. And they're like, no, I'm angry. Okay, that's okay. Angry it is. So, and then you will acknowledge what they wanted or they need. So we don't leave them just hanging like, oh, you seem angry, and then walk away. We're like, you seem angry, like you wanted X, or you were hoping for blank. It's either an action or an object, something that they didn't get, and that brought the upset or the feeling that they're experiencing. Okay, so let's see an example of what that looks like in the next slide. Okay, so you can approach a child that you think that they might be feeling sad. You can say, you seem sad, like you wanted the toy, or you were hoping to stay longer and play. And that's how we show empathy. Like we recognize what they want and how they're feeling. It doesn't mean that they're going to get it or they're going to fix it for them. We're just reflecting it back to them and helping them feel understood. And that is regulating, helps them go back to that window. Now let's practice. Next slide. I want you to put it in the chat. Look at this picture, and just by the context, you get to make it up. Maybe you have some situation at home. How would you fill those blanks? Like you seem, put it in the chat. You wanted, or you're hoping. Let's see where some of the ideas that people have. Let me see how we're doing on time. Any feelings? How do you think this boy is feeling just by looking at this image? Upset. Yes. What do you think he wanted? We get to make it up. Any idea? He wanted dad to play with him. Yes, yes, I like that one. You seem upset. You were hoping your dad would play with you or would spend some time with you. That's hard. Can we go to the next slide? Another opportunity to practice. Jamie, can you go to the next? Oh, there we go. How about this girl? How's she feeling? Ooh, mad. Yes. Angry. What else? Okay, no problem. Yeah, it does take a little delay. Thanks for helping, Jamie. Jamie is our marketing director, and she was very kind to stay on and help us tonight. So thanks, Jamie. Frustrated. Yeah, what do you think she wanted? Let's just make it up. Anyone? You wanted your friend to play with you. You wanted a candy. Oh, I see. Here it's coming up. You wanted to go into your sister's room. You wanted to go somewhere else. You don't like it here. That's hard. Yeah, let's go to the next one. Last chance to practice. Fire up. Ooh, how about this one? She was told she couldn't have something. Yeah, yeah, and they get mad. What about this guy? You seem furious. And so for younger kids, we can stick with the basic feelings, like from 3 to 6, probably we could do like mad, sad, scared. And then as they grow older, you go more advanced. You're like overwhelmed, anxious, upset. Okay, so this one maybe was bullied, you're saying. Okay. So you wanted the other boys to back off. Like you were hoping they would give you a break. And now it's something that after we have practice, we can help them practice what Becky Bailey says. Breathe with me. After you reflect the few, breathe with me. You're safe. You can handle this. That's hard. That's hard. Okay. Next slide. Ooh, there was one more. How about this guy? How's he feeling? What's going on here? Yeah, you're feeling overwhelmed. This is too loud. It's too much for you. You wanted the noise to stop. Yeah, you wish there was more quiet. And now we can offer some of those activities if you go back to that list. Oh, I like this one. He doesn't want to hear what someone has to say. Okay, you don't like what I'm saying. You seem angry. You don't like what I'm saying. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear. You wish I would stop talking. You wish I would. Some kids in play therapy, they're like, stop talking. Okay, that's another one you can say. That's hard. You can handle this. You can handle. Oh yeah, leave me alone. Leave me alone. From that list, what would be a good activity for this boy who wants to be left alone? If you guys remember from that list that we went through, maybe he could take a break in the safe place. Maybe he could have some like pillow or blanket or yeah, he can definitely go to calm down corner. Yeah, he may need like some water. Yes, take a walk. That would help to walk it off. I agree. And that helps to integrate the brain because you're doing right and left with your foot, right and left. Next slide. Oh yeah, cover. Now we go to reason. That's the moment all the teachers and parents are waiting. They're like, when are we going to teach them what they're doing is wrong? When we're going to set the limit? That's the moment. So remember, you help them first regulate, then relate. Sometimes we're doing them both at the same time. Then now they're ready to go to reason. So it may not be on the same day though. So it may not be in the same hour. It may be like, when school is done, after everybody's gone. It may be before they go to bed. It may be later. It may be the next day because maybe that explosion was too much. And so be sensitive to when it's a good time to come in with the teaching moment. And the key to the teaching moment, this is what Gary Landreth says. He says, if you can't say it in 10 words or less, don't say it because it's too much for them. You're going to lose them again. Don't turn it into a sermon. Okay. So let's see what are some examples of how we can do that. And we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, teaching moment, keep it short. So let's say after they're regulated, they're, calm. It's, maybe it's before going to bed and the parent is doing that, or maybe it's the teacher doing later in the day. You can say, sometimes it is hard for you when, and then you describe the problem. What could be a problem that's hard for kids? You put it in the chat. I notice you have a hard time with blank. Sometimes it's hard for you when you don't get your way. Sometimes it's hard for you keeping your hands to yourself. Yes. I notice you have a hard time with math. Yes. Yes. Oh yeah, they're touching everyone. Ugh. Ugh. And now we can invite the child to problem solve, because people are more likely to do things their own idea. And sometimes we don't believe in the child's ability to come up with their own solutions. So this is a time where you can say, I am wondering how we can work on this. And let them speak. Let them say, what would be helpful to them. Now we can have some of the list from the activities, because if they don't have any acceptable ideas, then you can offer. You could choose this or this. Oh, they play with the water bottles in class. Teachers, you work so hard. You work so hard. I want to recognize that. Okay, let's go to the next. I'm aware of time. I want to leave some time for questions. Now, limit setting. Sometimes we just need something fast and something that is easy and simple to remember. And I love the ACT model from Gary Landers. Put it in the chat. Have you ever heard of the ACT model for limit setting? Yes, no, somewhat familiar with. So I like this this tool because it's easy to remember and it goes through the regulation states. Okay, so first we're going to acknowledge the child's feelings, needs, and wants, what we already learned how to do. Then we're going to communicate the limit. And after we communicate the limit, we have to think about maybe one or two alternative choices that are acceptable to you before you offer. So a lot of times what I run into concerns with adults trying to set limits is that when we talk about choices, they actually use like one is a choice and one is a threat. So they will say something like, you can either do your homework or you're grounded for a month. And then it's like, well, that's not really a choice, right? That's a threat. So what are two acceptable choices? Like, you can choose to do your homework before dinner or after dinner. Like, not doing the homework is not an option. So we're giving them acceptable choices when they're not a threat. Now let's see an example of how to do that. So first, the A stands for acknowledging the child's feelings, needs, or wants. I know you want blank, or I know you're feeling blank. And then, but we're going to communicate the limit. This is not for blank. Then we target the alternative choices. That's what the T stands for. You can choose to blank or blank. Okay, let's see the example. Next slide. I know you were feeling frustrated, but the toys are not for breaking. You can choose to tear off the paper. You can choose to drink some water. And I'm just making up some stuff. So it depends on the situation. It depends on what choices will be available at that time. But it's kind of a simple, short, and fast thing that if you need, like right in the moment when you're seeing the behavior that needs to stop. And so I know you want to keep touching your friend. Your friend is not for touching. Like, you can choose to keep your hands like this or on the desk, or you can choose to, squeeze the stress ball, or you can choose to put your hands in your pocket. Like, think about the alternative choices. And I know I may be making it a little simplistic. Maybe you already tried some of these things, but you can start thinking of the problem behaviors and the choices you are going to offer in that time. And if that doesn't work, later on, when they're calm and regulated, we can have that conversation. Let's practice in the next slide, because I love practicing. I think this is helpful. So let's implement the limit setting right now. When you see that image, what do you think the child wants, or how is he feeling? And how can we set the limit here using that model? Put it in the chat. see. Sometimes it takes a few moments for the answers to come up. Any guesses on what he wants, on how he's feeling? So I guess in a situation like this, we could say something like, I know you don't want to do your homework, or I know you want to play with your pencil. I know you're feeling frustrated. Maybe this is the kid that doesn't like the math homework and they're feeling really frustrated. I know you're feeling frustrated, right? Your pencils are not for throwing, or but we need to finish your homework, and then we'll set the limit or say what we need to do. And then you can say, you can choose for me to help you. You can choose for doing it on your own. You can choose to take a 5-minute break. You can choose to have some water, or you can choose, just keep thinking about options. I really haven't got any answers for that. So I don't know if it's a delay. Oh yeah, he's having a temper tantrum. It could be. It could be. Then maybe mom or teacher needs to start with the regulating skills, the breathing. You say, you don't want to do, I know you're feeling frustrated. You don't want to do your homework. That's hard. Breathe. You can handle this. You can handle this. Your pencils are not for throwing. You can choose to blank or blank. See my voice tone? See how I'm slowing down the moment? All right. And I think our next slide, I'm going to talk about a little bit of these resources. These are some books that I recommend to all the parents and teachers that I work with. How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. Excellent. It's practical. It's easy to understand. And it has an entire chapter on reflecting feelings, on engaging children in cooperation. I also like that this book is available in Audible if you were one of those that need to listen and can listen in your commute. And The Whole Brain Child by Ben Siegel. That's the one that talks about window of tolerance. I like everything he writes. He's great. Conscious Discipline, hands down, best approach that I've found for teachers and parents. And so the Conscious Discipline, this blue book, is the one that is for teachers in classroom. And then the next one that says Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline, this is the version for parents. And what I like about Conscious Discipline is not only for the practical tools, but it's actually a way of being in relationships. So it's a set of values, and it helps you to connect at that relational level to your child. So highly recommend. And the last one is the Child-Parent Relationship Therapy. And this is more for clinicians. But if you are a parent who would like to learn how to better connect with your children, this is definitely a tool that is available. We actually tried to put a group together at JFS in the spring. We did not get enough people to sign up, but that can also be done in an individual basis. If you want to have counseling and focus your counseling on parenting skills, that is the curriculum that I use. So you can learn more about that on the website at the Center for Play Therapy at the University of North Texas. And I also left here the Child Trauma Academy website from Dr. Bruce Perry's that talks about the 3 R's model that we learned. And now I would like to open up for questions. So I actually can stay a little bit longer. I planned for this. Whoever is done and needs to hop off, feel free to do that right now. But I'll be happy to answer some questions if people have them. And if you can't think about any